Welcome everyone to the Retrospective, the engineering leadership podcast with Jeremy and myself, Peter. We are in the second season of our podcast and we are adapting the format a bit to be a bit more concentrated on one topic. So let's get into it. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Peter. It's really great to be with you here. And I have to say, I am loving the new format. This is our second episode. And today we're going to be focusing on an engineering manager that's starting with a new team. So Peter, walk me through at a high level. How do you see this? Can you give me a short summary of the whole thing?
Definitely, yeah. And I want to talk a bit about the context because the topic can be very big. So I made a few limitations. I'm focusing on an engineering manager staying within the same organization, just moving to a different team. I don't want to talk about onboarding to a new company because that's a whole other subject. And also during the discussions, I think we should stick to the happy path. Like, let's not talk too much about the extremes or niche edge cases and just focus on the main areas. So with this in mind, let's talk about engineering manager getting a new team. When I think about this process, I like to refresh the role of the engineering manager just briefly because I will use this structure when I'm explaining what you need to pay attention to. I think the main role of the engineering manager is threefold. It's delivery aligned with company goals, team health, and supporting individual growth of the members of the team. You can argue that there are some other aspects, but I think most of the roles of the EM can be added to one of these three groups. So that's one of the foundations I wanted to make. To kick off my thinking, I'm taking a concept from this book, The First 90 Days. I don't remember who wrote it, unfortunately, but we will put it in the show notes. But yeah, there you are.
Michael Dewey Watkins.
Thank you, Jeremy. The First 90 Days, it's a great book if you're onboarding to a new organization, especially if you're joining on an executive level or manager of managers level, because it's very strategic. There's a concept in this book that when somebody's going to a new organization, the net value, the value they're providing minus their cost is going to be negative. And their job is to move this value to the positive area as soon as possible. So with this in mind, while you're focusing on long-term impact, there are some actions you can take as a new EM. I will talk about assessment and challenging and everything, but I want to say out first that it's important to focus on some quick wins. And you can align with your manager, you can align with the team what these are, but the goal of these early actions is to move your value, net value, to the positive aspect.
I find the concept of that kind of negative value really important for people to understand, because when you come in, the short version is, unless you build trust with people and that delivering value into the context in your role, you're going to stay in the negative. In fact, your stock will probably go further down. So it's super important to have some kind of early sort of wins.
So let's talk about the transition to a new team. I think maybe the step zero is communication. There was a decision by leadership that you're moving to lead this new team. How do we communicate this? I think the announcement, if possible, there are edge cases, but if possible, I think the original announcement should come from the original engineering manager of the team, the previous one, the one who's leading the team now. Obviously, there can be exceptions if they needed to be fired for performance reasons or something, but we are sticking to the happy path. So the previous engineering manager should make the announcement to the team. The reason is because this person has the most trust with the team currently. And this is a highly stressful situation. Like, every change is stressful, but a change in your direct management line can be super stressful. And the person who has the most trust from the team can make this stress go away quicker. So current engineering manager, maybe if there is a joint point in management lines, then I can imagine a skip level, like a VP of engineering, CTO, or domain lead or something like this. But eventually the new EM should join these talks and just take care of the team. When I was preparing for this podcast and this topic, I jotted down 3 stages of a transition. I'm thinking that you start with assessments, you look at how things are, and you're trying to stay back a bit without jumping to conclusions too quickly. Because obviously you have a lot of context that you're missing. even though you were in the same organization, you don't know a lot of the team context. The second stage is identifying high impact efforts, where to focus on first. And then the third stage is the actual change and operation of the team.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
Go
one
on.
thing I would add in these phases is building trust. And I would say that's like the highest priority in that initial, especially in that assessment phase, is using it to also build trust. So getting to know people, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but that is the key way to build it. And then I think trust comes not only then from building up a relationship with people and kind of, I get to know you and so on, but then trust in your competence to do your job, trust in your ability. And that comes also from what we talked about, that quick win
Yeah.
and some kind of getting out of the negative zone and into the adding positive value to the team.
That's a very interesting aspect that you mentioned. If I understood well, you mentioned one of the trust is trusting yourself that you're competent enough to do this. And this can touch on this. Did I understand you correctly? Because that's
Yeah, as
super
in from your
interesting.
team members in your competence.
Yeah, but it can, what I understood first is that it has this self-reflection area, and it touches an important subject that we're probably not going to talk much about. But every kind of change can come with imposter syndrome, and that you're just, the challenge seems so big. Maybe it's the
Mm.
first time you're taking over a new team, and it's important, yeah, to, as you said, to understand what good looks like, have these quick early wins, so you can provide feedback to yourself also and through your manager that you're actually doing a decent job and you got this. But the more important point you mentioned was trust. And actually, this makes me reconsider the order of items I want to talk about, because my plan was to look at these stages, the assessment, challenge, change, and look at the three roles of an engineering manager, the execution, team, and individual level. Instead of this order, actually, I want to start with the individuals first, because as you said, the most important part is to build trust. And to build trust, you need to have the trust of the individuals in the team. So assessment of individuals, just like with the other points, there is a big advantage if you have access to the previous engineering manager.
Yeah.
If the person is living in circumstances where it makes it available for you to have a discussion, then definitely take that opportunity and start with that. That being said, take it with a grain of salt, because maybe they have a different context, maybe they have a different assessment of the people or the team. And you need to draw your own conclusions and not be impacted too much by the previous engineering manager.
That
Get
bias,
you.
like avoiding the bias in the handover, and especially where you get in some kind of handover, you have some level of question mark about somebody. I think it's
Yeah.
really important to use actual facts to validate what you were told. Because so often I've found that you can dramatically change the outlook on someone when you truly assess their, and or even have the conversation. It's super important to not just carry over a bias about somebody.
Let me jump to an example, because I think it helps understand the situation. Let's imagine that you're taking over a team and the engineering manager is saying that, oh, there is this Mark guy. He's always complaining about tech debt. He just wants to do refactor everything and doesn't want to work on product features, etc. And this is a stereotype, like some not very senior engineer, that often happens, that they are focusing on doing everything perfectly. So you have this gut feeling, you have it confirmed by the previous engineering manager. But if you spend some time with Mark, maybe it turns out that actually he's not wrong. Maybe the code state is bad and we are just very close to a catastrophic incident that can jeopardize the entire product, security-wise or any other aspects. This previous engineering manager didn't have a good assessment of what needs to be done and where needs to be paid attention. And maybe actually Mark has a better view on these things. So just an illustration. Have a grain of salt with whatever you hear from everyone, because they are
Exactly.
just a part of the puzzle.
And just for me, the really important thing is when you get told stuff, don't just accept it verbatim, validate it for yourself. Write down to validate this, to validate that. And that means you need to dive into the code. You need to dive into lots of things that go on. So
Yeah.
in this assessment phase, you're going to come on to some of the other areas of it. It's got to be hands-on in the details, seeing stuff for real.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just as you can be biased by others' opinion, you can be biased by your own internal biases also. And if you're aware of those, that can be very helpful. But moving on to the transition of an engineering manager and talking about the individuals, thinking how best to assess an individual when you're taking over, I would say that managing people, leading people, it's built on personal trust. And in order to have personal trust, you need to have some kind of personal connection with the people. So while it's tempting to jump onto the actual cases, code health, career path, everything, I would advise if you take over a team, just spend some time to get to know the person a little bit. What do they like to do? How do they like to work? There are a lot of important, almost bureaucratic aspects that you need to go through. But in order to be efficient in this transition process, you need to have a personal connection. So I would say a first introductory meeting that's not very structured, just break the ice, get to know each other. It helps if you already work together because you're in the same organization. But even in that case, the whole relationship is changing because now you're going to manage that person.
So
So yeah, you need to have a good personal connection. And then you can move on to the more professional parts of the discussion. I don't want to go too much into details. I think a few things that can help, look at the previous feedback cycle document. Like if the person received some feedback, get access to it. And even before you start to talk with them, get a high level overview. Try to find some external feedback if they had, try to find if they were on PIP before, if they were recently promoted, anything that can shape your understanding. And when you start talking, your goal should be to figure out the strengths of this person. I recently wrote on my site about the yearly feedback cycle, and I had the chance to explain that I'm a strong believer in strengths-based feedback. I think the best way to motivate people to do amazing stuff is understanding their strengths and showing them how they can use them. So naturally, I think when you're taking over the leadership or management of a person, you need to be aware of their strengths very quickly.
yeah, and this is the kind of thing where you end up finding out about maybe some of the challenges they have at home or whatever that it can impact their
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, or
Recently,
professionally
well,
also. Let's
yeah,
yeah. Discuss where are they in their career? Do they have a near ambition to get
mhm,
promoted? Have they just recently been promoted? Are they just happy where they are, which is also fine. You don't need to keep on having promoted every second year. Just get a feeling of what the work with this person be like, and
mhm.
also with every area, figure out if there are immediate fires.
Well,
Like if the person has a horrible relationship with someone, like the product manager, for example, somebody key on the team, make sure you're aware if there is something that you need to prioritize to solve first before other
exactly.
areas.
Okay.
But that being said, unlike other areas, I don't think you should change many things in individual management. I think you should just show support and almost take their context without validating, but accept that this is their context and that's how they are feeling. The reason is that it's a new situation. It's very stressful for them. You really don't want to come in as the new manager who changes something immediately because that makes the trust building goal very difficult. So the order is build trust first. And once you have the trust of the person, then you can suggest some things to change, like how they approach prioritization, what is their communication style in merge requests, all kind of things that you are burning to do quickly because they seem like quick wins. Hold yourself back a bit, show some restraint because the first goal with the individual is to build trust. Everything goes after that.
Yeah, just, small anecdote. I recently started a new job as CTO, and all of my first meetings with people were pure personal introduction,
Great.
focusing on just getting to know each other. And only a little bit in that first meeting was really focused on the wider part of the company or so on. It was really focused very much on their, journey in the company so far and so on. And,
Yeah.
then we had maybe a little bit at the end of that first meeting about the company context itself. But I think this is if you skip this, you're probably going to have some real issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's everything you want to do is going to be
Mm.
much harder. And it's just going to get easier if you manage to build trust somehow later. I
Yeah.
would even advise that if you're not working in a distributed company, go out for a lunch, for coffee or something. Move the context of the discussion a bit away from the professional
Mm.
setting. You don't need to overstep boundaries and have overly prying questions, but sharing a meal with someone is a great way to connect and start to get to know someone.
Yeah. This starts to touch into the team aspect that you're going to talk
That's
about. But
exactly what I wanted to
the
do.
thing I was going to say is that social thing can also be as a team and some kind of early team
Very good
building or
idea.
lunch. The other thing to say is that obviously these individual conversations are going to lead into the second two big areas of the assessment that you're going to talk about, because some of these individual conversations are going to pop up topics about how the team is operating or the company and so on.
Yeah, definitely. And this, you lead to my point, because in the wider context, I believe that the smallest piece that you can judge the performance of in an organization is not the individual, but the team. And the engineering manager is part of the team. As long as you don't have distrust from all the individuals, you cannot really be a fully part of the team, and you cannot really start to address the performance issues from the
Mhm.
team. So let's talk about the team a bit, and how you can do the assessment of the team's workings and how they are as a team. You, as you mentioned, definitely do some interviews, to talk with all the individuals and start to get assessment of the team workings once you have some level of trust with everyone on the team. Things you can look at is the software development lifecycle processes, how they are managing tasks, how are they doing planning, what issue management tools are they using and how they are using it, how the code repository is built up, etc. What kind of ceremonies they have, bug triage processes, everything. You need to understand what they are doing currently before you try to change anything. It's fairly typical to come into a new team and start to say, "What we should do bug triage this way." First, understand how they are doing it, and go a step further, understand why they are doing it like that. What were their problems that this kind of operation is solving? Again, this is the happy path. So if some processes are clearly not functioning and the team is also fed up with what they have to do every week, then definitely a challenge and change can come sooner than other cases.
Yeah. I would say here, when you're kind of assessing and looking at how the team is working, emotional intelligence is super important to sort of try and understand the dynamics of the team. Who is speaking all the time? Do you have a tech lead or a couple of strong tech people? How are
Mhm.
they interacting with the others? Are they micromanaging them? Is everyone in a level playing field inside the team? You know, all of the different little subtleties of that little mini ecosystem is super, super important.
Yeah, it's very
Um,
important and it's not easy because a lot of these stuff are not explicit and they are not written anywhere. You just see that, for example, to your point, like if there is a new pull request in the team, who is the one who's always jumping on it first or frequently jumping on it first? Who receives a lot of back and forth in their comments and whose feedback is just hanging in the air? All this kind of little information can point to some kind of team dysfunction that you're gonna need to address when you're fully transitioned to an EM role.
And there's one maybe other thing I would add on here, which is there's a difference when you're a manager in an organization going to a new team in the same organization, because you understand the dynamics of the org and how the history of many things in the org and how we do things. Whereas if you're a brand new manager joining a new company, you should be extra cautious
Yes,
of how that team works, and not just try and say, oh, we should work this other way that you've
yes,
seen somewhere else. You should take a lot of extra time to understand, is this specific to the team? Is it the org that does it a certain way? And really, yeah, just try and parse through that and be sensitive to that. So yeah, because if you've been in another team in the same org, you can come in and you can say, oh, that's different. You might be able to make a change that's easier because of that, or not, or whatever. It's just being sensitive of the differences of that. I think I've seen a lot of new managers to a new org pile in with a lot of changes that actually go against how we're trying to do things in the org, because there's a logic to the particular way that we do things.
Exactly. And you need to understand this logic first. You need to understand what motivated the previous person who set up these processes to work like this. I would take it to the extreme. Even if you come in as new and start to have new ceremonies and new process, everything, even if you are right and this is the right thing to do, I would say that you have a high chance of failure because you didn't have this trust level, you didn't have this understanding. You don't know what was the context, and it's going to be just really hard to implement something new without all these fundamentals first. So hold yourself back a bit and understand what's going on and why are they doing things that seemingly weird way.
Yeah. So we move on to the sort of the third pillar that you talked about and around
I
delivery.
wanted to mention just something because I've thought about this a bit, this quick wins topic, that we talked about, that this is the exception, and there are some good typical first candidates that you can look at that has a potential of doing a quick positive impact. I listed a few stuff like the number of work in progress. This is a typical sign of a struggling team when they are working on too many things at the same time. If you can confirm this quickly, and that's something that's fairly easy to confirm because you see how many tickets are being worked on, people are complaining about it. You're the new manager. You can make a decision and say, okay, I help you prioritize. Don't work on this. Only work on that one little thing now. And once you're done, we'll move on to the next. So this is one of the quick actions you can take. You can increase the amount of pair work. That's usually helpful in a team also. You can look at how bugs are handled, cut some unnecessary meetings. We are veering into the area where it's maybe not a good idea to do it quickly, but these can be candidates in quick win.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, if you're going to do anything, introduce it as an experiment first, low threat way to do it. It's just, you discuss it, have a hypothesis, you present the idea, people kind of on board, just run it for a short period of time, then revisit it. And that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love it for so many reasons. Where first, the obvious is that if you're wrong, then it's easier to backtrack. But the other thing is that it promotes this safety to fail mindset and promotes the focusing on the learnings instead of what we are actually outputting. So yeah, I really like this framework. Like, this is an experiment. Let's try working on one thing for this, one person, one thing for this week, and see in a week how it worked. Or let's try you two working together all the week to this week and see the results. And if you frame it as an experiment, you can increase the trust of the team.
Yeah, and don't do 10 experiments at the same time. Basic scientific.
Exactly. You have no idea what worked and what didn't. Yeah, only change one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about delivery. Actually, sorry, I had one more thing that I remember, the team that I really like. I didn't use it personally, but I saw you using it, this social contract or team contract. Can you explain it briefly? Because I saw it working and I was amazed at how strong it can be.
Yes, I think fundamental to any team working well together is a written down social agreement of how you actually plan to work together. And I think it's actually foundational for every team to have social agreements in place. And I think you can call that a social contract. I've seen some others, but basically this working agreement of how you do things that covers maybe times of when you do meetings, how you turn up to meetings, how you handle being late, common working hours of the teams, what's expected in terms of responding on chat. And it's a living document. It's a document that you should revisit during the team's retrospectives and update over time.
Yeah, I saw it working in one of my teams, and I saw it being very powerful. It even had some values and principles, and that was just a very good document to get back to in case of any conflicts or misagreements. I really wanted to capture that because I think that
this is a whole episode on just social contract.
Maybe we should do a whole episode. Yeah. But let's move on to the delivery part. This is where, while in the assessment, you need to get a lot of inputs. Like, you need to get in the assessment of the team performance. I think one of the most important points is getting the feedback from the team, asking how productive they feel, how do they feel about their performance, what do they think are their strengths, and what's holding them back. But equally important is doubling down on your relationship with the product manager, or if you're working in a triad, UX or design leader, to understand really the delivery context of the team. And then you should focus on not just the product scope, but in time also, like what was the latest release, what problems you were trying to solve, what are we working on now, how does our roadmap look like in the future, what does our backlog look like, and just immersing yourself in the whole delivery and product aspects of the team.
Yeah. I mean, the first two areas we talked about, understanding individuals and having them be successful, understanding how the team is working. If you have those working, but you don't have delivery, you're going to fail. You will fail. And, again, you probably need those two to do the delivery part. Otherwise, you could be a pretty tyrannical engineering manager that nobody
Yeah.
likes. You'll get found out for that too.
People are going to leave your team and your company.
Yeah, ultimately, if you see that happening a lot, as someone who manages other managers, you want to understand why that turn is happening. You usually have exit interviews. And yeah, so ultimately, this is the bread and butter of the team. And as part of delivery, I would also say that you need to understand who are the internal stakeholders that your team interacts with, the other teams that you may have dependencies with regularly, and so on. And building those kind of connections and relationships depending on your tenure with the company. But those are really, really important. I just see that your role as an engineering manager is to manage the internal stakeholders of a company for your team, whereas a product manager's sphere goes to the external stakeholders. There's an overlap.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for mentioning the external stakeholders, because that's what I wanted to get at, that while traditionally it's not really the role of the engineering manager and the engineering organization to have a strong relationship with the customer, the external stakeholders, what I would urge every engineering manager to deeply understand who their customer is, who they are working for, what are their problems, what solutions we are trying to give them. Even if you're not going to be the person who has the last word on this area, if you know the exact context, you're going to make much better decisions in your own engineering scope.
Exactly. And that's because it's not about making sure the buses run on time. It's about making sure the buses go to the right places on the right bus routes. And that means you need to deliver a result that's aligned with what the business needs. And so you need to understand the business. And it's critical, absolutely critical.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's gonna be one of the foundations how your work is gonna be judged, how good of a job you did, how well was it aligned with business goals.
Yeah.
Just quickly, a few more stuff that I noted that technically, you should get also familiar with the delivery, what the team is working on. You should get familiar with the code base a little bit, infrastructure health, deployments, CI/CD pipelines. Just understand the whole software delivery lifecycle process, how these are building up and what condition they are in. And finally, any kind of organization-wide metrics, the company is using Dora metrics, for example, just get a bit familiar where you are. You can look at how you compare to other teams. You can look at how you compare to industry standards, but also look at tendencies if you can, like how did this number change in the last year? What trajectory is it looking at? All this kind of information can help you get more comfortable in your role and also can give information to your prioritization about what areas you're going to need to look at.
Exactly.
And finally, typical first candidates that you can maybe look at. There are two areas that I really like. The first is the work balance between tech dev work and product work. If your team is already measuring where they spend their time, that's a great start because that's something you can monitor when you're taking some changes. And the other one is just take a look at the backlog together with the product manager. And if you can find a few stuff, like there is a saying, at least in Hungarian, that the new sweep is sweeping well. I'm pretty sure there's something similar in English. You can easily get away with saying a few things like, we're just not going to fix this. This is a valid problem, but its impact is so small and the work needed to fix it is, we're just never going to have the time to prioritize it.
Yeah.
And just clean up the backlog a bit.
When you're talking back again about starting with a new team and you're in the negative, I think that's very much the case in delivery and communication. And One way to get to zero is just clarity of communication to your stakeholders about delivery and being really on top of the current work that the team are doing and reporting of the current work. And you can get into kind of like the positive zone here by just shaping the way the delivery comes out into smaller, more regular drops,
Yes.
demos, a lot of things that help the team to tell the story of what they're doing better and to give your stakeholders a feeling things are under control, that we're working on the right priorities and so on. But I think this is an area where, at least by just being quickly in the first few weeks being on top of delivery is already it gives your manager a sense of security that you're doing the very basics right.
Yeah, this is important that you touched on, and maybe we can talk a bit about this explicitly, is that be very well aligned with what is the mandate you're going into this team. What does your manager think you should be doing here? What does good look like in your role as a new engineering manager of this team? Because you might discover that there are some subtle differences between your understanding and your manager's understanding, and you should bring this up and discuss, because that's how your success is going to be judged eventually. Also hard, like every change is stressful, but it's even harder on the engineering manager if this transition to a new team means also switching managers if your own manager is changing, because then you're on both ends of this process. Like you need to build quickly a good working relationship with your new manager. And I can say maybe this is another topic about managing up and everything, but I think what we can say with confidence is that the foundation of it is similarly the trust. Your manager needs to trust that you're going to do a good job in this team. And you need to trust your manager that they're going to have your back and support you and communicate transparently. To build that trust, it's between two people. Just be a bit human, understand the other person a bit, have a relationship with them, and it's going to be easier.
Yeah.
Okay, what else did we leave out?
Well, a lot, because we're
Yes,
we're talking
exactly.
about the happy path. There's bumps in all of this, and again, that goes back to the human relationships, the trust that will get you through it. I think that's a critical part
I
in all
think
of.
there's one aspect that maybe is worth calling out about managing individuals. The biggest fear when somebody changes manager is that their career progress was lost and they need to start from zero again with a new manager. It's super frustrating if you've been working towards a promotion for quarters and years and you just get a new manager when you already had a, maybe not written, but you had an implicit or implied alignment with your manager. The next cycle you're going to get there, and then the manager leaves and in comes you. What do you do in this case? I think building trust also applies here, but part of that is just calling out explicitly, saying that you can even say that I talked with your previous manager. I start to get your context. I'm going through all the formal feedbacks you received. I'm going through everything. And based on this, I'm going to make an assessment, but correct me if I see something wrong. Leave it open to interpretation and be flexible, because again, the first goal you should have with everyone is to get their trust. And to get their trust, you need to ensure them that you're going to support them in their career journey.
Yeah. Actually, this is one question I ask every time of both the outgoing manager and the person separately, is what kind of implicit, explicit promises existed between you and your manager, whether that relates to the way they work, maybe some exceptions to how the company's rules are. They could be promotion stuff like, oh yeah, I'm going to promote you in 6 months, etc., or whatever it is. But get that out in this process. I think that's really critical.
I agree. The fear of this word being lost is usually one of the big sources of anxiety for people going through a manager change.
So, Peter, we talked about 3 stages: assess, challenge, change. And then we had the individual, the team, and delivery dimensions to that.
Yes.
I was curious if you could give me a real world example of where it may not be perfect by the book in your framework, but I'd love to hear a real world example of these stages being played out in a team that either you or you've seen someone else doing.
Yeah, in my previous place, I supported some managers going through this change. And it sounds so trivial to build trust with the people, but I'm telling you, this is the hardest for a lot of folks. Like
Yeah.
everyone is going in with preconceptions. Everyone is going in usually with a lot of ambition. They want to prove that they're going to be a good manager. And oftentimes they want to prove it to their manager and not to the team, where they should actually prove that they're going to be a good manager. So this building trust phase is often non-trivial for a lot of managers.
Yeah, and my counter example is exactly the flip opposite of that. The worst one had a new manager come in that's not worked out is absolutely where they violate trust in the difference between do and say in like very early on in the whole relationship, and they never recovered from it.
It's
very
hard.
hard to
Yeah.
rebuild.
Yeah. And it's really hard because you don't know what exactly are people sensitive for. For example, I really don't like if people are not disciplined and precise in their, like if they keep their promises or if they're not late from meetings, etc. Somebody who doesn't know me doesn't know that this is a big deal for me. So it's hard because you don't know what will trigger some people in your new team. And you need to be 200% in the first few weeks to figure out what are the areas where you need to consistently be 100%.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up this episode on how to join a new team as an engineering manager. And Peter, I found, like a really helpful advice in here. I hope that you do as well in the audience. If you have questions, please, you don't hesitate to ping us. We're still a fledgling young podcast with a new format, trying to figure ourselves out. So you know how to feed the algorithms to give us a boost, and hopefully actually just, if you think this is helpful and this can be helpful for someone else that you know, please share the word.
That's the biggest thing you can do to help us. Thank you.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See you soon.